we need to identify what the threats are. There's no point in talking about asset protection if we don't actually know what we're trying to protect against. And I like to categorise things. I see threats categorised into three different types. The first one is operational threats. So these are risks that come from the core of your business, and they're the hardest ones to isolate from the business risks. The next lot are internal threats, and they're not the core threats, they're not operational threats, but they're still internal to your business, so they might be employees and those sort of things. And then we have external threats, so they're things from outside your business that are potentially going to come from externally and wipe out either your external wealth or can have a go at the wealth within that your business represents. So I'll just touch on a few of these just so you can get a feeling of how I've categorised different risks into those three categories. An operational threat is underquoting. That is probably the biggest threat to most people's businesses. That's why most building companies go broke. That's why lawyers every now and then have a bad month. It really is a fundamental operational threat to your business. And that's usually because you didn't have the financial information to quote appropriately. Then we get to some more obvious ones, making a defective product. If you're going to make a product to make money and it's defective, that's a threat. And obviously we address those things through total quality management and those sort of counter approaches. Giving someone the wrong answer. So if you're in professional advice business, that's a threat. Injuring an employee who's actually working on the job to do something. Injuring a customer or client, whether they just walk in. Interestingly enough, we were talking in our internal training session on Monday about the changes to the workplace OH&S responsibilities, which are, I haven't put anything specifically on that here, but they'll frighten the bejeebers out of you by looking at just how deep that responsibility goes for people's physical well-being. And then harming the environment. So if you create pollution as a result of your business operations, that's something that can give rise to liabilities. So then internal threats. So these are the threats that are internal, but they're not linked to actually producing a product or providing a service. The number one threat that wipes out a lot of businesses is alongside of is fraud and theft. So one of your employees, with their hand in the cookie jar. Disclosure of IP, confidential information, and know-how. So how well are those particular assets within your business locked down? Allowing an employee to be harassed by another person, loss of equipment or operational capacity. So you can getting the sort of idea that's sort of somewhat remote from your core activities, but still something internal. And then external threats. So things that you weren't influencing within your business. And the main one I've sort of seen recently is obviously a loss of debt funding or an increase in the cost of debt funding due to the GFC. That was something that wiped out a whole lot of business wealth because people didn't see it coming and weren't protected for it. Arguing with your business partner. So the next sort of ticket item on the list is where I see business value destroyed, is people spend 10, 15, 20 years building up a business. There might be 3 people in the business, and then 2 of them have a war, go to war with one of them, and the whole thing is destroyed, or a significant chunk of that business value is wiped out. Accusations of mismanagement by shareholders, a change in the regulatory regime or law. So, for example, financial planning is massive changes in the regulatory regime that had nothing to do with running a financial planning practice internally, or necessarily even the relationships with your clients. But there's a complete change in the framework within which you need to operate your business. Has seen some pretty tough times for various elements of that sector. And then separation or divorce. We've all seen instances where business wealth and external, personal wealth has been consumed by feuding couples. And then this is a sleeper, but I think it's a really important one, and it's probably a combination of all the other threats impacting you, is the physical and mental fitness of business people. And that's something that you notice as advisors, and you see that people don't really talk about it, but it's a huge threat. And it's usually the one that precipitates some sort of a change at some stage. I'm not going to dwell on this, but the risks are real. If you once again you do a Google search, you're going to see a lot of instances, and we all see instances of the paper of really some pretty big numbers attached to the sort of threats that we've just touched on. So I promised a case study in the invitation, and I'm going to just sort of talk about the elements of this particular business person. But unfortunately, just the way I've structured it, we're not going to sort of go through it in a very methodical case study way, but we're going to come back to these elements as we go through. But this is a very common sort of scenario where you've got a business, you've got business premises, which is sort of a store of wealth, but it's used in an active way within a business. Business assets, plant and equipment, so in this case in the scaffolding business, that's the stuff that they put up. Employees, customers, assets outside, and a spouse and business partners. So this particular business owner is really, you can now attach those threats to the various elements of what this person's carrying on. We've talked about the nature of asset protection and the threats that we're dealing with. And fundamentally we come to the question, what can we do? And I break this down pretty simply, and it's three things. Wake up, negotiate, and quarantine. And that's really the basis on which I approach asset protection. So we're going to go through each of those. So wake up is what I call operational asset protection. This is, if we tie back into the risk framework, this is minimising the risks in the first place. This is taking the risks off the table. The next one is negotiate, which we'll talk about contractual asset protection. And this is how you share risk. So you've got a risk, you haven't been able to eliminate it operationally, so now you're going to share it with someone. And when you share risks to allocate them to the people who can best manage them. That's how the economy becomes efficient. And finally, quarantine, which I call structural asset protection, which is quarantine the risks. If all else fails, stick them in a box somewhere and keep them away from your other assets. And most people start with the third, with structural asset protection. And as you'll see, I call that the Armageddon defence. So if everything else fails, you're still going to be left with something. But you don't start there in my view. But a lot of people do. Clients come in or work with other advisors, they go straight to how many trusts and companies can I set up in the shortest possible time to give you asset protection. But the first two are really where you can make a difference. The third is if you get to the third, you're almost too late if that's a consideration. So we'll start with operational protection. Apparently this pilot was asleep. I had someone driving a car asleep, but then I saw this one on the internet. I thought that's not a good time to fall asleep, I don't think, if you're flying an aeroplane. So with operational asset protection, we're basically talking about taking back responsibility at the front end, right at the front of your business. And we're talking about limiting risks by the actions you take day to day and the actions that your clients take day to day. So most people don't have legal problems. This is the structural thing. They just have failed to avoid something that was avoidable. So the risk areas, obvious ones, product liability claims, workplace injury, environmental issue. But the more common are things like a cash flow crisis caused by pilfering, the loss of a key employee who doesn't feel needed or mentored appropriately, and a disgruntled business partner who doesn't think that you're pulling their weight. They're the sort of things that are going to bite you in the context of operational asset protection. So basically what I'm saying is business owners get into trouble when they fall asleep. And that's probably the biggest risk to their business, not some fancy threat that they're going to solve through structural asset protection. So the most positive action you can take to protect your assets is to refocus on your business operations and take back responsibility. And what I'd like to suggest is that when people come and talk to you about asset protection, or you want to talk to someone about asset protection if you're in business, you start there, because that's where you're going to add the most value. And I was probably sounding more like a business consultant than a lawyer at this stage, but we do get into a little bit of law later on. So now I'm going to break a rule of presentation and put too many words on slides, and I'm just going to flick through them quickly. Primarily I've done this so that when you get the slides you can see these issues. This is sort of a checklist that I would go through to address the issues of operational asset protection. So you're getting the right financial information to run the business. Things like, what are the key things about your business? What makes it your business? How much does it cost to open your doors, your biggest customers, important suppliers, etc. And then start what's happening with your cash flow. Are you collecting your debts? Does anybody have your fingers in your till? Do you have the processes in place to detect variances? That's how you deal with that issue. And who's got authority to operate your accounts? Do you have a register of your accounts and who's got operational authority and what their limits are, so you can immediately know when somebody resigns or whatever that you can close that off. Next, look at your stock levels. Is someone pinching your stock? Do you have too much of it? Is it too old? Employees, do you have job specifications? Employees are a huge source of risk. Do you have job specifications? Because you can't performance manage someone unless you've got a job specification. It's that simple. You can't go in to see a lawyer and say, oh, I've got this person, oh, they're not working out, things aren't, they're not stepping up. The first thing I say is, well, are they meeting their job specification? Because that's what you're performance managing them against. If you don't have that, you're really behind the eight ball. Are they trained? Do you have terms in place? Is it a safe work environment? And then the bigger picture issues with staff, the ones that really probably are more important in the sense of, are they the correct staff? Do you need to get rid of some of them? And is there negativity within the workplace? That seems to be the main one. And a business doesn't last long with customers, so you need to address risk areas around customers. Have you got the right ones? Are they asking too much of you? That's really the big risk from customers, is when they ask too much and you go somewhere where you're not comfortable and you ultimately let them down. And equipment, how old is it? How safe? Is it efficient? Do you need to upgrade it? If you're running a cafe, you need a new fit out. And then intellectual property, some issues there. Is it protected? And business partners. Are they pulling their weight? Are the expectations clear between you all? And then, do you have the right team of advisors? Are you doing enough marketing? And then finally, what's your health like? Do you need to step back and address that? So ultimately, when I'm talking about operational asset protection, I'm talking about striving for operational excellence. Practical steps. Wake up. Review the key areas of operational risk. Make a risk register. That's a very common basic risk management tool. And apply standard risk management techniques. So that's the business consultant hat off, and the lawyer hat goes on, and we talk about the next strategy, which is contractual asset protection. So this is the next sort of wall between your business wealth and the threats that we've talked about.